Hi everybody, I am back again with this hand spun, hand woven cardigan because I am going to finally finish it. I've let it hibernate for far too long, and next weekend is Schacht's great big 55th anniversary party, new ownership and retirement for the current owners, Barry and Schacht and Jane Patrick, and I want to have this thing ready to go unless it's 80 degrees, which is not uncommon. You never know what the weather's going to do on the Front Range of Colorado. So, like I said, I want to finish this, and actually letting it hibernate was not a bad thing. When I get stuck on a project, I find that hibernating often just gives me time to sort of let things process in the back of my brain. You can't see, but I just gestured toward the back of my brain. Um, and then I can come up with new solutions. So, as you may recall, let me zoom in here. The problem was not the front edges, because those were selvages, and I paid really close attention to my selvages when I was weaving. The problem was not the side seams, because those are made from the selvages, and in fact, this part down here where there's a vent, I folded in the front part of the vent uh, so that it would match the side seam of the whole thing, but I did not fold in the longer side of the vent. This is just the selvage. So all I did there was hem, and I think that I hand stitched the opening closed so that it would look nice. So those aren't the problem. Even the center seam between the two back panels, not the problem. The problem that I was trying to solve, the situation I was trying to fix, was the crosswise grain of the fabric. So this is where I had to cut the warp ends, and the original pattern has you just keep the fringe. So you go ahead and zigzag stitch along the shoulder seams, um, or this whole edge of the fabric, and then you just fringe it a little bit, and so the back panels to the front panels at the shoulder. And I did not love that option, and my first attempt to fix it ended up working really well, but this time I just felt stumped. I did not understand how I was going to give myself good looking edges. So as I said, I let this hibernate, and as it turned out, when I turned back to it yesterday, oh my gosh, suddenly I had this great inspiration for all future renditions of this same pattern, which I'm likely to make again because it is just a delightful little garment to wear. And it's so much fun to weave. It's really, really fun to weave when you're using your handspun. And I wanted to fix this problem. So I had finished the back in a way that I did not especially love, because you can still see the raw edge. So again, I zigzag stitched, and you can see the zigzag stitching right here. I zigzag stitched everything. Here it is right here. And then I had to figure out, what am I going to do next? Because remember that when this garment is worn, the two front panels, you see the reverse side. They have what's called a reverse in dressmaking terms, and I might be mispronouncing that because I never learned these terms from hearing them. I learned them from reading them. So reader's pronunciation here, which means that the wrong side would show. So whatever I did on this edge needed to be something that would look good on both sides, since this part is super, super visible. So what I had thought about doing, and this is what I did yesterday, this is the side I finished, was finishing the edge with some sari ribbon that I had just bought in great big rolls on Etsy. And this particular part of that great big roll happened to match these colors really well. And again, you can see this very easily on the one that I finished. So here on my super extreme close-up, you can see that this edge is now neatly bound off, and it is virtually impossible to see any stitching at all on the silk ribbon. And when it flops over, it's actually going to have a nice amount of weight, like the weight of this very light silk ribbon. But this will just hang nicely and it will look great on both sides. So how did I do this, you ask? And I'm glad you asked, because here's how. So I took a small length of the silk ribbon and I put its raw edge on what you might call the right side of this front panel. Sorry, the wrong side of this front panel. And I just backstitched about 1/8 of an inch, maybe 3/16 of an inch from the raw edge underneath. And you can see this. You can see that the zigzag stitching is still visible. And here's my line of hand stitching. And I chose to do this by hand because I was going to have a little more control over what happened than if I tried to use my sewing machine. So hand stitched it and then, oh, and folded in just a small amount on each of the cut ends of the ribbon. And this is exactly what I did on this side. Next, I'm just going to fold over and then fold up a small amount on the raw edge of the ribbon so that I don't have any raw edges showing. And then I'm just going to hand stitch it down. So remember, this is currently the right side of the fabric, but when the front panel flops over, it'll be the wrong side. So what people will see most likely is this very clean looking line of stitching. And as long as I'm really careful to take tiny stitches, and I'm pretty good at hand sewing, so this shouldn't be a problem, that's also what they'll see on this other side, just to make this really clear. So this is the front panel from the right side of the fabric, and this is the side that I folded over, and I don't even know that it has a stitch, catch stitched. So as long as this width stays even all the way across, everything's groovy. So this is the side that I back stitched and then folded over. And then this is the side where I just turned it under by hand and just did the usual little stitch that we all learn when we're sewing a facing down on a garment. Like I said, I don't think it's even got a name, but you just stick the needle. Here, let me do this with pins. And yes, I got a needle in my mouth, so I'm talking funny. Okay, needle out of my mouth. This is much better. So I would pick from the wrong side of the fabric, and then I would catch just the tiniest, even that's too big. Let me get in even closer for you. And then I would catch just the teeniest bit. And it's actually easier to see when my finger is behind it as contrast. The teeniest bit of the fold here, and then I would pull the needle through, and I would just keep doing that from one end to the other. And I would then sew the two raw, or the folded edges of the ribbon taped together like that too. So the great thing about this solution is next time I make this jacket, this cardi, if I do this before I sew the shoulder seams, I won't have these messy raw edges showing anywhere. And it will add extra stability and strength to the shoulder seam, because on any garment like this, the whole weight of the garment hangs from the shoulders. So you want to do whatever you can to minimize or to maximize stability here. So again, let's imagine that before I sewed, so this is the armhole edge, just turned under once and top stitch. Imagine that I had, before I sewed any other seams on this cardigan, that I had that I had bound off the edge like this. So first I would zigzag. You still want to zigzag because you do not want these cut ends of warp working their way loose. I would zigzag. I would, and this I would probably do this part I would definitely do on machine. Then I would match the raw edge of the ribbon to the raw edge of the cut fabric, and I would seam right next to. I would seam right along this line on the other side, right underneath, just to the west, so to speak, of the line of zigzag stitching, because that line of zigzag stitching is what's keeping everybody together, and it would continue to do so even inside this binding. So I would stitch along here by machine, then I would fold it over, and depending on how frizzy or even the ribbon was cut, you can see that this frays because it's really, really super fine silk. I would either hand stitch the whole other side of the binding down, or I would fold it under, press it under, get out my little clips, and do it by machine very, very neatly, because that would be visible on both sides of the fabric, depending on the look I want. And I could choose to do this with a ribbon that matches the colors of the garment. I might turn it into a design feature. I might do any kind of crazy thing. But once both these edges of the top of the cardigan fabric have been finished off, then I would sew my shoulder seams. And then I would do anything necessary. I haven't thought this all the way through yet, but I would do anything necessary to make sure that this back edge looks as good as it should. And it might just be as simple as snipping this seam allowance. And then I would sew the rest of the jacket, and then I would have this beautifully finished seam along here instead of this kind of messy looking cut edges thingy going on, and that would make me much happier. So that is just one possible solution. Another possible way to do this, though I would need fabric to do this, is to just sew a lining for the cardigan. And that would also do the trick. But I'm really happy with this solution right now. And I am not inclined, like I did on my first one of this Sock It To Me cardigan. The first time I single crocheted with leftover yarn along from the bottom of one front edge all the way up to the top, then around the whole neckline, and then all the way down to the bottom of my other side. But honestly, I did such a good job on these selvages that I kind of want to show them off. So I'm not going to do that this time. I'm just going to do this little tiny edge along the top, and we'll see how it goes. But anyway, that is that problem sorted, and I'm going to, hopefully the weather will cooperate, and this will look fabulous. And lots of people will go, oh, did you make that? And I'll get to say, yes, not only did I weave the fabric, I wove it from my handspun, and I wove it on a rigid heddle loom, which is, to my mind, the absolute best way to get started weaving, because it doesn't involve a whole lot of equipment costs up front. It's really easy to set up. It's really easy to weave, and then you get beautiful fabric. So I hope you enjoyed my journey with this cardigan. And who knows what we'll do next week, if I even have time to post.